She was rejected and prevented from living a great love because she was black and poor. But time passed, and when he found her again, he couldn't believe it. Samala had every reason to give up on love after being rejected by the one she loved most. But with strength and determination, she reinvented herself and carved out her own space. Now, with the past knocking on her door and secrets that could change everything, Samala must decide whether to follow her heart or protect the life she has built. Will love be able to overcome time and differences? The morning sun illuminated the small public school in the neighborhood, and the laughter of children echoed through the hallways, mingling with the smell of new notebooks and snacks. Samala, a young black girl with curly hair and a broad smile, hurriedly walked to the classroom. In her heart, she carried a love that blossomed discreetly but intensely for Daniel, her classmate. He was middle class, with light eyes that shone like diamonds in the sunlight. Whenever they met, it was as if the world around them disappeared, and all that remained was that moment between them. That day, they were together on a science project. Samala and Daniel sat side by side, sharing ideas and laughs. The teacher talked about the importance of environmental preservation, but his words were lost in their lively conversation. "Do you really think we can make a model for the school project with recycled paper?" Daniel asked, looking at Samala with curiosity. "Of course. We can show that it's possible to create art and take care of the planet at the same time," Samala replied, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. "And we can even use the colors of our country's flag. It's going to be amazing." "You always have the best ideas," Daniel praised, and Samala felt her face heat up. It was a simple moment, but it made her heart race. Recess time came, and they headed to the playground, where students scattered, playing soccer, chatting, or trading stickers. Daniel and Samala moved a bit further away, looking for a quieter place to continue their conversation. "Samala, have you thought about what you're going to do after school?" "I want to study medicine, but I don't know if I'll make it," Daniel confessed, looking at the sky as if seeking answers among the clouds. "I'm still deciding, but I want to do something that helps change people's lives, something that makes a difference," Samala said, daydreaming. "Maybe I'll open a beauty salon. I love doing hairstyles, and I think I could help boost people's self-esteem." Daniel smiled, admiring Samala's determination. "That would be amazing. I'm sure you'll make it. And who knows, one day, I might come to your salon and get pampered, right?" he joked. "Of course. I'll give you a hairstyle that will make your hair stand on end," Samala replied, laughing. At that moment, she felt that nothing could separate them. The love she felt for Daniel was pure and true, and she believed it was reciprocated. However, the happiness of that day was about to be interrupted. As they were talking, Daniel's mother, Mrs. Helena, appeared in the playground. Her imposing and authoritative presence made the relaxed atmosphere tense. Samala felt a shiver down her spine when she saw the disapproving look of the woman. "Daniel, what are you doing with her?" exclaimed the mother, her voice high and sharp like a knife. "Come here right now." Daniel hesitated, looking at Samala before getting up. "Mom, we're just talking about the school project," he explained, trying to stay calm. "I don't want you involved with her. She's a bad influence," Mrs. Helena shot back, her eyes fixed on Samala, as if she were responsible for everything bad that could happen. Samala lowered her head, feeling the humiliation choking in her throat. "But Mom, she's my friend, and we're just working together," Daniel insisted, but Mrs. Helena's expression didn't soften. The woman approached Samala, her words sharp as razor blades. "Listen to me, girl. You must stay away from my son. You don't belong in our world. You have nothing to offer him, and I'm not going to let you drag him into your life of misery," said Mrs. Helena, and every word felt like a blow to Samala. Samala's heart broke into pieces. Tears threatened to roll down her face, but she fought against them. "I just want to be his friend, Daniel. I'm not a bad influence," she murmured, looking at Daniel with desperation. Daniel, distressed, didn't know how to react. "Mom, please." But his words were interrupted. "You don't understand, Daniel. This kind of relationship is unsustainable. Think about your future," said Mrs. Helena, her voice now calmer but still authoritative. The disapproving look she gave Samala was enough to make the young girl feel smaller, as if she were worthless. But Mom, enough. I don't want to hear more about this. Now let's go home, Mrs. Helena ordered, and Daniel, though reluctant, followed his mother, casting a final sad look at Samala. Desolate and alone, Samala sat on a bench in the playground, feeling the pain of rejection consume her hopes. The laughter of the children around her seemed distant, as if she were in a world apart. What was wrong with her? Why wasn't her love enough? She wondered, with anguish tightening her chest. The sun began to set slowly, and the orange light turned the playground into a fairy tale scene. But for Samala, everything seemed gloomy and desolate. The tears she had fought so hard to hold back began to slide freely down her face. The pain of rejection enveloped her like a heavy cloak, and she felt lost. "Are you okay, dear?" A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. It was Mrs. Clara, the history teacher, known for her empathy and kindness. Samala looked at her, trying to smile, but the pain was unbearable. "I don't know, teacher. I think I've lost something very important," she confessed, her voice breaking. "Sometimes, things don't go as we plan, but that doesn't mean you're not special. You're an incredible young woman, full of dreams and potential," said the teacher, placing a comforting hand on Samala's shoulder. "If you need someone to talk to, I'll always be here." "Thank you, teacher. That means a lot to me," Samala murmured, feeling a bit lighter. As the day came to an end, Samala realized that she needed to change something in her life. The rejection from Daniel and the disapproval from his mother made her reflect on her own ambitions. It was time to take control of her destiny. If her love for Daniel wasn't enough to overcome social barriers, then she would need to find her own path, one that would lead her where she wanted to be, away from the shadows of rejection. With a new purpose forming in her heart, Samala got up from the bench and took a deep breath. She knew the road would be difficult, but she was determined to turn her pain into strength. The future was still open, and she was ready to face it with her head held high. Samala walked through the streets of the city, absorbing every detail around her. The contrast between her new reality and the life she had left behind was immense. The cobblestone sidewalks, the murmur of conversations on the terraces of the houses, and the smell of freshly baked bread coming from the bakeries surrounded her like a familiar but distant embrace. The idea of working as a caregiver for Mrs. Williams seemed like a new beginning, but also a constant reminder of the pain of her rejection by Daniel. Upon arriving at Mrs. Williams' house, Samala looked up to admire the imposing residence. The wrought iron gate, the well-kept flowers in the garden, and the large windows that let in a golden light were a reflection of a life of comfort that seemed so distant from her reality. She took a deep breath, trying to push away the anxiety that had accompanied her since she received the job confirmation. When she knocked on the door, the sound resonated in her heart, and a palpable anxiety enveloped her. After a few moments, the door opened, revealing an elderly woman with white hair and bright eyes, who looked at her with a curious and welcoming expression. "You must be Samala," said Mrs. Williams, in a tone of voice as soft as a summer breeze. "Come in, dear. I've been eager to meet you." Samala smiled shyly, smoothing the simple blouse she was wearing. "Hello, Mrs. Williams. It's a pleasure to be here." As soon as she entered, she realized that the house was even more dazzling inside. The hallway was adorned with landscape paintings and framed portraits. The scent of lavender floated in the air, and a sense of peace enveloped her. Mrs. Williams motioned for Samala to follow her to the living room. "Tell me a little about yourself, Samala," Mrs. Williams said, settling into a comfortable armchair. "What do you like to do?" Samala hesitated, but the kind look from Mrs. Williams seemed to encourage her to open up. "Well, I've always liked taking care of people. My mother used to say I had a gift for it. And I love doing hairstyles for my friends." Mrs. Williams smiled, her eyes shining with interest. "Hairstyles? That's fascinating. Have you ever thought about making a career out of it?" "Actually, I hadn't thought about it much, but I would like to learn more," Samala replied, feeling a spark of hope ignite within her. Days passed, and as Samala dedicated herself to caring for Mrs. Williams, a genuine friendship began to blossom between them. Mrs. Williams was a woman full of stories and wisdom. and Samala felt increasingly comfortable sharing her dreams and aspirations. In their conversations, Mrs. Williams often praised Samala's skills. "You have a natural talent for hairstyles, dear," Mrs. Williams would say as Samala helped her get ready for a social event. "I see how you transform even the most unruly hair into something wonderful." Samala would smile, a bit embarrassed by the compliments, but at the same time, they encouraged her. "Thank you, Mrs. Williams. I really enjoy doing this." One afternoon, as they were sitting in the living room, Mrs. Williams looked at Samala with a serious expression. "You know, Samala, I was an executive for many years. I worked hard to earn my place in a world that often doesn't accept people from humble backgrounds. But I learned that, with determination and a bit of audacity, it's possible to change your own life." Samala listened intently, admiring the strength and resilience of the woman she now considered a mentor. "Do you really think I could do that? Open my own beauty salon?" "Of course," Mrs. Williams affirmed, with a sparkle in her eyes. "And I'd like to help you achieve that dream." Samala remained silent, absorbing the magnitude of what was being offered to her. "How could you help me?" Mrs. Williams stood up and walked over to a desk where she kept some papers. "I have some capital saved. If you're willing to work hard, I can help you with the initial investment to open your salon." Samala's eyes filled with tears. "Mrs. Williams, this is very generous of you. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me," said Mrs. Williams, gently placing her hand on Samala's shoulder. "I just want to see you shine. Life has already given you too many challenges, and it's time for you to take control of your destiny." The conversation continued, and Samala began to outline her plans. She recalled the afternoons spent at home, experimenting with different hairstyles on herself and her friends, and the idea of finally having her own salon seemed like a distant dream that was now within reach. In the days that followed, Samala immersed herself in preparations. She researched how to open a business, made budgets, and even started planning what she would like to offer in her salon. Mrs. Williams, always by her side, guided her and gave her valuable advice. "You should think about offering services that stand out," advised Mrs. Williams in one of those conversations. "Think about something you and your friends have always wanted but never found. Maybe I could create a space where people feel comfortable being themselves, a place that celebrates beauty in all its forms," Samala suggested, feeling inspiration welling up inside her. Mrs. Williams smiled. "That's perfect. And remember, it's also important to build a good relationship with the community. Word of mouth will be your best ally." With Mrs. Williams' support, Samala began to gain confidence. The idea of opening a beauty salon pulsed within her like a new heart, and with each passing day, she felt more determined to turn that dream into reality. On a sunny day, while they were in the garden, Mrs. Williams looked at Samala and said, "Are you ready to take the first step? Let's find a place for your salon." Samala smiled, her heart racing. "Yes, I'm ready." They both set out to explore the city, visiting different places. Samala couldn't contain her excitement as she imagined what that space would look like, decorated with vibrant colors, mirrors that reflected not only the external beauty but also the inner beauty of each client. As they walked, Mrs. Williams shared stories of her youth, her struggles, and victories, and Samala listened attentively, inspired by the strength of the woman who had become a role model in her life. "You're a true warrior, Mrs. Williams," Samala remarked, admiring the dedication and love the elderly woman put into every word. "I hope to have the same courage as you someday." Mrs. Williams smiled, her eyes shining. "You already have that courage, Samala. You just need to believe more in yourself." And at that moment, Samala felt she was taking firm steps toward her future, a future that, although still uncertain, now seemed bright and full of possibilities. The pain of the past began to dissipate, giving way to a new hope that beat within her, like a flower about to bloom. Samala observed her own reflection in the dusty mirror of the small room she now called her own. The space was simple, with peeling walls and old furniture, but there was a pulsing energy that made her heart race. Although she was surrounded by financial limitations, something inside her knew that she was at a turning point. It was the beginning of a new life, and she was determined to make it worthwhile. With a deep sigh, Samala got up and began to arrange her things. Deep down, The pain of rejection still accompanied her, but with each passing day, she felt a little stronger. "I will make it," she murmured to herself, like a mantra. "I am more than other people's opinions." As soon as she finished getting ready, she hurried out to Mrs. Williams' house. Upon arrival, Samala was warmly greeted by the elderly woman who was sitting in her favorite armchair, wrapped in a wool blanket. Mrs. Williams smiled as she saw her. "Ah, my dear, you're more radiant every day," she exclaimed, putting her reading glasses on her nose. "Thank you, Mrs. Williams. I'm doing my best," Samala replied, feeling a little lighter in the presence of this special woman. "Are we working today? I have some ideas for your salon," Mrs. Williams said, winking. Samala felt a surge of gratitude. Mrs. Williams had become her mentor, but also a friend. During the long hours they spent together, Mrs. Williams shared her life experiences, and Samala absorbed everything like a sponge. "Yes, let's do it," Samala replied, encouraged. "I still need to save up the necessary capital, but I'm doing my best to save." "Don't worry about that, dear. What you need is a solid plan and a little boldness," Mrs. Williams encouraged her as she began to flip through some fashion and beauty magazines. "Let's calculate the costs and see where we can cut." They spent hours discussing what would be necessary to open the salon. Samala felt that as she talked about her dreams, Mrs. Williams was helping her turn her ideas into reality. Between laughter and planning, they sketched out a project that seemed tangible. "You have talent, Samala. Don't forget that. People will love what you have to offer," Mrs. Williams said, with an approving look. "Thank you. I just hope that when all this happens, I can also help other people," Samala replied sincerely. "I want my salon to be a place where everyone feels good, not just about their appearance, but also about their lives." "You'll achieve it, dear. Believe in yourself as much as I believe in you," Mrs. Williams said, and Samala smiled, feeling more confident. As the weeks went by, Samala began working 2 jobs. During the day, she cared for Mrs. Williams, and at night, she did occasional work as a hairdresser at local events. It was exhausting, but the adrenaline of being so close to her dream kept her motivated. One of those nights, while she was working, she received a text message from her friend Anna. "Daniel is in town. Did you see? He's going to an event tomorrow." Samala's heart raced. She didn't know if she was ready to see Daniel again, especially considering how things had ended. But at the same time, part of her wanted to have the opportunity to show who she had become, far from the shadow of her rejection. "Samala, are you okay? You seem thoughtful," Mrs. Williams commented, noticing the distant expression of the young woman. "Oh, I'm just thinking about some things about the past," Samala replied, trying to hide the anguish. "You don't need to worry about the past. What matters is the future you're building now. Don't let old memories stop you from moving forward," the elderly woman advised. Samala nodded, knowing that Mrs. Williams was right. But even so, the day of the event was approaching, and the anxiety was growing. On the night of the event, she wore a dress she had bought on sale, a simple model that made her feel elegant. Looking in the mirror, she didn't see just an insecure young woman. She saw a determined and full of dreams woman. Arriving at the event venue, the atmosphere was filled with lights and laughter. Samala took a deep breath and entered, trying to stay confident. Each step felt like a challenge, but she remembered Mrs. Williams' words and the strength she had found in herself. As she moved through the crowd, her gaze met Daniel's. He was talking with some friends, and his smile lit up the room. Samala's heart raced. Daniel saw her, and for a brief moment, they locked eyes. A wave of memories flooded her mind, but she quickly turned away, determined not to be swayed by the past. "Samala, so good to see you here," exclaimed a familiar voice. It was Anna, who approached her with a sparkle in her eyes. "Let's dance." Samala smiled and let herself be carried away by the energy of the party. The music played, and she felt alive as if she was finally freeing herself from the chains that had bound her to the past. While dancing, she realized that even amidst the crowd, she still felt Daniel's presence. It was as if an invisible line connected them, but she refused to look back again. The night continued, and Samala had fun, but she couldn't help her thoughts from returning to Daniel. He seemed so different, so comfortable in his world. While dancing with Anna, She saw Daniel walk away with a group of friends, and a feeling of sadness washed over her. Why was it so hard to leave the past behind? At the end of the night, when the music started to fade, Samala decided it was time to leave. The energy of the party still pulsed around her, but she needed time to process everything she had felt. However, as she was leaving, a hand stopped her. It was Daniel. "Samala?" he said, surprise evident in his voice. "Is it you?" She turned slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. "Hello, Daniel," she replied, trying to stay calm. "You look beautiful." "I didn't know you'd be here," he said, with a shy smile appearing on his face. "Thank you." "I didn't know you'd be here either," Samala replied, feeling a mix of joy and insecurity. "There was a time when I used to see you every day. I miss that," Daniel admitted as their eyes met. Samala felt her heart race. What did that mean? She wanted to believe that things could be different, but the pain of rejection still weighed on her mind. "Yes, I miss it too," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "Do you remember our conversations about the future? I always thought you'd be a great entrepreneur," Daniel continued, with a sincerity that took her by surprise. "I'm working on that. I'm opening my own beauty salon," Samala revealed with pride, though part of her feared his reaction. "Wow, that's amazing. I always knew you had talent," Daniel said, in an admiring tone. For a moment, time seemed to stop as they looked at each other. Samala wanted to believe there could be a new opportunity, but the reality of their lives still loomed over them like a shadow. "Thank you, Daniel. It means a lot to me to hear that from you," she replied, feeling a mix of hope and fear. "I'd love to hear more about it. Can we talk sometime soon?" he suggested, with a sincere look. "Sure, we can," Samala replied, feeling a knot in her stomach, but deep down, she knew things would be different now. She had changed, and she wouldn't let the past define her again. With one last look, Daniel walked away, and Samala stood there, her heart racing and her soul vibrating, aware that the road ahead was still full of challenges but also opportunities. She was ready to face whatever came, determined not only to overcome her past but to embrace a future that promised to be bright. The sun shone brightly over the city, reflecting off the glass windows of the shops and the cars rushing by. Samala's new beauty salon, with its vibrant colors and a facade that exuded pride and modernity, attracted curious glances. She had worked tirelessly to get there, and now, with several branches in operation, the young entrepreneur was an example of perseverance and success. Inside the salon, the smell of beauty products mingled with the soft sound of background music. Samala, standing behind the counter, watched her employees with a satisfied smile. Each of them was a crucial part of her business, and she felt fulfilled seeing the team working in harmony. The laughter and lively conversations of the clients filled the space, creating a welcoming atmosphere that had always been her goal. "Samala, you won't believe the number of appointments we've received for next month," said one of her employees, Aline, with eyes shining with enthusiasm. "We're fully booked. This salon is a success." "That's incredible, Aline. And it's all thanks to the hard work of each of you. We can't forget to maintain the quality of our service, okay?" Samala replied, her voice full of gratitude and motivation. The employees agreed, and the conversation soon shifted to plans for the grand opening of the new branch. Samala was already envisioning the party, with lavish decorations, live music, and, of course, special discounts for the clients. She dreamed of turning that moment into a celebration not only of her success, but also of the strength and unity of the women who had always supported her. While she was lost in her thoughts, the sound of the doorbell caught her attention. A client entered, and Samala made sure to attend to her personally. It was a middle-aged woman with well-groomed hair and a welcoming smile. "Hello, dear. I'm Mrs. Elza, and I've heard great things about your salon. I'm excited to try a new look," said the woman, settling into the chair. "Welcome, Mrs. Elza. I'm so glad you came. What would you like to do today?" Samala asked, gathering the tools needed for the service. As she worked, the two chatted comfortably. Mrs. Elza shared stories of her life and how excited she was about changing her look. Samala, in turn, talked about her inspirations and the journey she had taken to open the salon. The conversation flowed naturally, and Samala felt increasingly confident in her ability to connect with people. "You're an admirable woman, Samala. It's so inspiring to see someone who comes from humble beginnings achieve so much. Not every day do you find people like that," commented Mrs. Elsa, impressed by Samala's work on her hair. "Thank you, Mrs. Elsa. I could never have done it without the support of my mentor, Mrs. Williams. She taught me so much and gave me the strength I needed to move forward," Samala replied, her heart warming at the memory of the elderly woman who had helped her during difficult times. Time passed quickly, and Mrs. Elsa left the salon radiant, praising the new look Samala had created. Watching her leave, the young entrepreneur couldn't help but smile. The success of the salon wasn't just about the number of clients, but also the positive impact it was having on people's lives. In the following days, Samala's schedule remained full. However, despite her happiness and the recognition she was receiving, something was troubling her. The thought of Daniel wouldn't leave her mind. Even after all those months, she still remembered him fondly, and what hurt the most was how things had ended between them. "Samala, you're thoughtful today. Is everything okay?" Aline asked, noticing her friend's distant expression. "I'm just thinking about some things, Aline. You know how life is, complicated sometimes," Samala replied, trying to hide the melancholy that accompanied her. And it was on one of those days that the unexpected happened. Samala was organizing the decorations for the opening of the new branch when suddenly, the salon door opened and Daniel walked in. Time seemed to stand still. He was there, in front of her, more mature and with a friendly smile. "Hello, Samala. Congratulations on your success. I heard you're doing an amazing job with your salons," he said, the sincerity in his voice surprising her. "Hello, Daniel. Thank you. I'm glad you're here. How are you?" Samala replied, trying to maintain her composure. She felt her heart race as she saw him again. "I'm good, working and studying more. Actually, I've been following your achievements. It's inspiring to see you thriving," Daniel said. Looking around the salon, Samala didn't know how to handle the situation. His presence made her feel a mix of emotions, and the old pain began to resurface. "I appreciate the support. It means a lot to me knowing you're cheering me on," she commented, trying to keep the conversation light. They both began talking about their lives, as if time hadn't passed. Daniel talked about university and his ambitions, while Samala shared stories about her growth as an entrepreneur. However, there was a palpable tension in the air, as if they both wanted to say more but hesitated. "Do you remember how we used to dream together in school? About the future and what we could achieve?" Daniel asked, with a nostalgic smile on his lips. "Yes, I remember it very well. It was a beautiful time, wasn't it?" Samala replied, nostalgia flooding her heart. "I miss that. Having someone to share dreams with," Daniel said, his eyes meeting hers. The connection between them seemed almost tangible, and Samala found herself questioning whether there was still something between them. Before she could respond, the employees began to approach, interrupting the moment. Samala felt a knot in her stomach as she realized that Daniel was about to say goodbye. "Well, I don't want to interrupt your work. I just wanted to congratulate you in person. I hope we can talk more sometime soon," Daniel said, leaning in to give her a quick kiss on the cheek. "Sure, Daniel. I hope so too," Samala replied, feeling a mix of hope and uncertainty. When he left, Samala stood still for a moment, processing the conversation. Her emotions were running high, and she felt lost amidst so many conflicting feelings. Despite all her success and the achievements she had reached, Daniel's presence made her realize that no matter how hard she tried to move on, a part of her still loved him deeply. The rest of the day passed in a whirlwind. Samala tried to focus on the salon's activities, but her mind kept wandering back to the conversation with Daniel. He seemed more mature, more aware of his actions, and that made her think that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for them again. As the sun set on the horizon, Samala looked out the salon window, contemplating the life she had built. She was a strong and independent woman, but what to do with the feelings she still harbored for Daniel? The question echoed in her mind, and she knew that regardless of what happened, the road ahead would be full of challenges and decisions that would shape not only her future but also her heart. The sun set on the horizon, tinting the sky with shades of orange and pink as Samala prepared for another social event. The atmosphere was filled with tension, a mix of excitement and anxiety. Since her beauty salon had become a success in the community, she had begun to receive invitations to events that were previously unattainable. However, Daniel's presence at each of these events made everything more complicated. She looked in the mirror, admiring her elegant dress that accentuated her curves. Her hair, carefully styled in a sophisticated updo, showed a few loose strands framing her face. Although she looked radiant, a knot formed in her stomach at the thought of possibly crossing paths with Daniel again. The last time they met, he had congratulated her on her success, but the distance that had grown between them was palpable. At the event, the room was filled with well-dressed people, lively conversations, and laughter echoing all around. Samala took a deep breath and joined a group of acquaintances. She didn't want to appear insecure, although her heart was racing. However, her gaze soon fixed on Daniel, who was chatting animatedly with a group of friends. He looked so handsome, with that smile that always brought her a mix of joy and sadness. "Samala, you look stunning," exclaimed a friend, pulling her into the center of the conversation. Samala forced a smile, but her eyes couldn't stay away from Daniel. What should have been a moment of celebration turned into a painful reminder of what she had lost. "Have you seen how Daniel looks?" one of the women in the group asked, noticing Samala's gaze. "He probably has a new girlfriend. Look how much fun he's having." Samala felt a knot in her stomach. The thought of Daniel having moved on hurt, but she knew she needed to be strong. "Yes, it seems so," she replied, trying to maintain her composure, but her voice betrayed a slight tremor. The night went on, and while Samala tried to participate in the conversation, she couldn't help her thoughts from drifting back to the past. Memories of the moments shared with Daniel haunted her. From the laughs in class to the shy kiss they shared behind the school. The pain of rejection was still there, like a wound that never fully healed. Across the room, Daniel's mother watched the scene with a critical eye. Since she learned of Samala's success, she hadn't spared any effort to discredit her. Whenever she had the chance, she spread rumors about Samala's humble origins, trying to diminish the value she had achieved with so much effort. "A poor girl cannot be a respected entrepreneur," she thought, with a disguised smile that fooled no one. "Samala is nothing more than a seamstress trying to pass as an entrepreneur," she murmured to a friend, who nodded in agreement, although she could see the sparkle in Samala's eyes and how she attracted everyone's attention. Meanwhile, Daniel was at an emotional crossroads. He had noticed that Samala's presence always left him unsettled. Superficial conversations failed to hide what he really felt. He approached an acquaintance, trying to distract his mind, but his attention always returned to the young woman on the other side of the room. The way she interacted with others, the confidence she exuded, all of that intrigued him and, at the same time, confused him. In a moment of bravery, Daniel decided to approach Samala. "Hello, Samala," he said, with a hesitant smile. "You look amazing tonight." "Thank you, Daniel," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "You look good too." The conversation was filled with formalities, but the tension between them was undeniable. "I've heard good things about your salon," Daniel commented, trying to find a point of connection. "Thank you," she said, forcing a smile. "It's been a challenge, but I'm happy with what I've achieved." The conversation flowed for a moment, but soon Daniel realized his mother was approaching. "I have to go. I hope we can talk more later," he murmured, before walking away. Samala watched Daniel walk away, a mix of hope and despair washing over her. His presence still affected her like a wave crashing against the shore, always bringing back memories, but also a sense of renewal. She was determined to show everyone, especially herself, that she was capable of much more. Determined to do something impactful, Samala began planning a charity event for the community. She knew she needed support, and the idea of inviting Daniel made her nervous, but also excited. It was the perfect opportunity to show what she had built and how much she cared about the people around her. "Samala, are you really thinking of doing this?" Mrs. Williams, her friend and mentor, asked when Samala shared the idea. "A charity event is a big responsibility. Yes, I want to do something that helps the community, but I also want people to see my work," Samala replied, determined. And I'd like to invite Daniel. I want him to see who I really am. Mrs. Williams smiled, admiring Samala's courage. I think it's a great idea. You have the chance to show everyone that success isn't just about money, but about the impact we can have on people's lives. With Mrs. Williams' support, Samala began planning the event. Every detail was carefully thought out, from the choice of venue to the invitations. The day of the event finally arrived, and Samala was nervous but excited. She hoped Daniel would be there, not just as a spectator, but as someone who understood her journey. When Daniel received the invitation, he hesitated for a moment. He knew it would be difficult, but something inside him urged him to go. The desire to see Samala again and better understand her new life motivated him to set aside any insecurities. At the event, Samala was radiant, surrounded by friends and family, all excited about the cause. When Daniel arrived, her heart raced. He was there, and she wanted him to see not just her success, but also the strength and determination he had always admired. "Hello, Samala," Daniel said, a little hesitant. "The event is beautiful." "Thank you, Daniel. I'm so glad you came," she replied, a genuine smile lighting up her face. The night went on with speeches and presentations, and the energy in the air was contagious. Samala saw the opportunity to share her story. When she took the stage, the nervousness overwhelmed her, but she took a deep breath and began to speak. "I'm Samala, and I come from a place where opportunities were scarce," she began. "But with hard work and the support of my community, I managed to open my own beauty salon. What I've learned is that success isn't just about what we achieve, but how we can help others rise as well." The guests were attentive, and Samala could feel the power of her words resonating in the atmosphere. She looked at Daniel, who was watching her with a mix of pride and admiration. The connection between them was palpable, as if time and circumstances hadn't changed what they felt for each other. This event is an opportunity to give back and support those who are still struggling. Together, we can make a difference, she concluded, her voice overflowing with emotion. As the audience applauded, Samala felt warmth in her heart. She had exposed herself, and now, everything seemed clearer. With Daniel there, the hope of a future together began to ignite again, like a flame that had never completely gone out. After the charity event, as the guests began to disperse, Samala was called by Mrs. Helena for a private conversation. Although hesitant, Samala agreed, sensing that something important was about to happen. They moved away from the salon and found a quiet spot in the garden, illuminated by the soft lights of the night. The silence between them was heavy with tension until Mrs. Helena finally broke it. "Samala," Mrs. Helena began, her voice slightly trembling, "I wanted to thank you for listening to me. I know our interactions in the past were not the best, and I have a lot to explain." Samala looked at her, surprised by the gentle and almost vulnerable tone of the woman who had always been an authoritarian presence in her life. "I didn't expect this, Mrs. Helena," she replied, trying to understand what was happening. Mrs. Helena sighed, crossing her hands in her lap. "I see in you a strength that, to be honest, I've always envied. Your courage to fight for what you believe in, to follow your heart, that's something I never had." Samala remained silent, allowing Mrs. Helena to continue. "When I was young, like you, I also fell in love," Mrs. Helena revealed, her voice dropping in tone, as if she were confessing a painful secret. "I fell in love with a wonderful man, but he was black. And at that time, my mother couldn't accept that. She did everything she could to separate us. She sent me to a boarding school in England, far from everything and everyone I knew." Samala felt a knot in her heart. She had never imagined that the woman in front of her, so rigid and prejudiced, had gone through something so similar to what she herself was facing. Mrs. Helena continued, her eyes now fixed on a distant point, as if she were reliving the past. "I didn't have the courage to fight against my mother. I didn't fight for the love I felt, and I ended up conforming to what she wanted for me. I got married, had children, but that pain never went away. I never stopped thinking about what could have been." She paused, breathing deeply before looking directly into Samala's eyes. "When I saw you and Daniel together, all that fear came back. I was afraid he would go through the same pain I did, and that's why I tried to push you away, tried to control his life, just as my mother did with me. But now I see how wrong I was." Samala felt tears in her eyes, but she remained firm. Mrs. Helena's words resonated within her, stirring a mix of sadness and empathy. "I admire you, Samala," Mrs. Helena confessed sincerely. "I admire your strength, your courage. You fought for everything you believe in, even when the world seemed to be against you. I didn't have that courage, and now, looking back, I see the cost of that in my life." There was a moment of silence, where only the gentle sound of the wind could be heard. Mrs. Helena took a deep breath, as if she were freeing herself from a weight she had carried for years. "I'm no longer going to try to prevent you and Daniel from being together," she continued, her voice filled with a calm resignation. "I acknowledge what I did wrong, and I know I can't change the past, but at least I can avoid repeating the same mistakes. Love should not be hindered, and I don't want my son to suffer the consequences of my decisions." Samala nodded, feeling a surge of respect and, strangely, affection for the woman who was finally showing her true self. "Thank you, Mrs. Helena," she said softly. "I appreciate your sincerity, and I hope we can move forward, learning from the past but not being prisoners of it." Mrs. Helena smiled slightly, perhaps for the first time, showing a vulnerability she had never revealed before. "I hope the same, Samala. And, honestly, I wish you both happiness." They remained there for a few more minutes, in a shared silence that this time was not filled with tension, but with mutual understanding. And when they finally parted ways, Samala felt that, in some way, she had gained a new ally, someone who, despite her mistakes, was willing to change and accept love as it is. After the charity event, Mrs. Helena's revelations and the unexpected closeness with Samala brought a new perspective for everyone. Daniel's mother began to genuinely approach Samala, and although reconciliation was a slow process, it was evident that there was a true intention to change. Daniel, for his part, started to see his mother in a new light, no longer as the rigid and authoritarian figure, but as a woman who had been hurt and shaped by circumstances beyond her control. Meanwhile, the relationship between Samala and Mrs. Williams continued to strengthen. The two became inseparable, sharing dreams, stories, and plans for the future of the beauty salon. However, time seemed to be running out, and Mrs. Williams' health began to show signs of weakness. Samala noticed it, but whenever she asked, the elderly woman would evade the topic, insisting she was fine. One night, after an exhausting day at the salon, Samala decided to stay a little longer with Mrs. Williams. As they talked, the elderly woman sighed and held Samala's hand tightly. "My dear, there's something I need to tell you." Samala felt a knot in her heart. "What's wrong, Mrs. Williams? Are you okay?" Mrs. Williams smiled sadly. "I'm fine, dear, but my time is running out. You must have noticed by now." Samala tried to hold back her tears, but she couldn't. "Don't say that. You still have a lot of time." "I wish that were true, but I can't deceive you, Samala. I know I'm dying, and I don't have much time left. But before I go, I need you to know how much you've meant to me. You gave me a new reason to live in my final days." Samala cried silently, feeling the weight of her mentor's words. "You've been like a mother to me. I don't know what I'll do without you." "You will keep living, Samala. You will keep dreaming and achieving everything you've ever wanted. And I've made sure you have the resources to do so." Samala looked at Mrs. Williams, confused. "What do you mean?" "I've transferred all my savings, all my capital, to you, Samala. Now you have enough to expand your salon, open new branches, and make all your dreams come true. It was my final gift to you." Samala was in shock. "But why? You worked your whole life for this. I can't accept it." "Of course you can. Because you deserve it. Because you're the daughter I never had. And because I know you'll do something wonderful with this gift. I'll always be with you, Samala, in every client who smiles as they leave your salon, in every new branch you open. This is my legacy to you." The two embraced, and in that embrace, Samala felt all the strength and love that Mrs. Williams had dedicated to her. The sacrifice the elderly woman had made was not just financial but emotional. A complete surrender of everything she had left in life to ensure Samala's future. The next day, while Samala was arranging the final details in the salon, Daniel appeared at the entrance. He seemed calmer, as if a great tension had been relieved. "Can I come in?" he asked, with a hesitant smile. "Of course," Samala replied, feeling her heart race as she saw him. Daniel approached slowly, his eyes showing a sincerity that Samala hadn't seen in him before. "My mother told me about the conversation you had last night," he began, without preamble. Samala nodded, unsure of what to say. "She was very sincere with me, and I'm very grateful for that," Daniel continued, his voice low but firm. "My mother told me she's not going to try to keep us apart anymore. And I want you to know that, regardless of that, I've always wanted to be by your side." Samala looked into his eyes, feeling a surge of emotion. "I've never stopped wanting that too, Daniel. But things were so difficult." "I know," he interrupted her gently, taking her hands. "And I don't want it to be difficult anymore. I want us to build something together, without fear, without barriers." Samala took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of his hands and the weight of the words. "I want the same, Daniel, but I want us to do it for us, and not for anyone else." Daniel smiled, a smile full of hope and determination. "Then let's do it. Let's build our future together, our way." And so, with that silent and powerful commitment, Samala and Daniel decided that they were ready to face the future together, not with the shadows of the past, but with the light of a love strengthened by truth and understanding. The sun set on the horizon, tinting the sky with shades of orange and pink as Samala and Daniel walked together through the city streets. The atmosphere between them was one of tranquility, but also of anticipation. They both knew that, after everything they had faced, the future seemed more challenging but also full of new possibilities. "I feel so relieved that my mother finally understood," Daniel said, breaking the silence as he looked at Samala by his side. "I didn't know how all this would end, but now I feel we can really build something together." Samala smiled, feeling the warmth of his touch in her hand. "So do I. Your mother was very brave to admit everything that happened and to recognize her mistakes. I think that's a big step for all of us." They continued walking, watching as the city lights began to shine, illuminating the path ahead. The weight of recent revelations and reconciliation still hung over them, but there was a new kind of hope in their hearts. "Samala, I want you to know that I'm by your side, no matter what happens," Daniel said, stopping for a moment and turning to her. "Everything we've been through has only made me realize how much I want this. I want us to be together, facing whatever comes." Samala looked into his eyes, seeing the sincerity and determination there. She knew the road wouldn't be easy, but she also knew she wasn't alone. "I feel the same, Daniel. And now that everything is clear, I think we can really start. No secrets, no fears." They continued walking, now with more determined steps. Samala was aware that the salon, her ambitions, and her relationship with Daniel were part of a new phase in her life. A phase that would require even more from her, but one that she was ready to embrace. "About the salon," Daniel began, hesitant but with a spark of excitement in his eyes. "Have you thought about expanding it even more? Maybe taking your ideas to other cities, who knows, even outside the country one day?" Samala laughed softly. "Are you already planning my empire, Daniel?" she teased him, but deep down, the idea excited her. "I'm still focusing on what we have here, but who knows? I've always dreamed big, and you have all the potential to realize those dreams," Daniel affirmed with conviction. "And I want to be by your side, helping in whatever way I can." Samala felt her heart warm. They weren't just talking about business or personal ambitions. They were building a future together, based on trust and partnership. As the cool night wind passed by them, Samala looked up at the starry sky, feeling at peace for the first time in a long time. "I think that, with you by my side, we can face anything." Daniel smiled, holding her hand more firmly. "I believe that too." They continued walking, discussing their plans, dreams, and how they could support each other. The road ahead was still unknown, but for the first time, Samala didn't feel fear. She had Daniel, and together, they were stronger than ever. And so, hand in hand, Samala and Daniel faced the future, not with anxiety, but with the confidence that, no matter what came, they would be together, and that was all that mattered.